Hi there, my name is Karina, and this knitting instructional video is part of a series of how-to videos that I'll be creating for my Knit 2 Together, Purl 2 Together knitting blog. This year, I've decided to tackle each knitting pattern listed in the Vogue Knitting Stitch a Day 2011 calendar. I plan on combining all of the knitted swatches together to form a quilt by the end of the year. As I go through and tackle each pattern, I will be blogging, taking pictures, and videotaping my progress, providing any notes and tips that I may have, plus offering any insight on how to knit each knitting pattern. Today I will be talking about the Chevron Panels rib knitting pattern, as you see here, and this is what it looks like on the Vogue Knitting Stitch a Day calendar. As you can see, it's a rib knitting pattern. It consists of the same multiple of rib stitch repeated twice to be able to create that rib look. And the pattern calls for a swatch dimension here, you can see. In the pattern, in the Stitch a Day knitting calendar, they ask for a multiple of 16 stitches across plus 3 stitches at the end to form the latter edge part of the rib. And then for the height is just a multiple of 6 rows, and you repeat the rows 1 to 6 over and over again to form the same pattern. So again, if you were to look at the picture, you can see there's 16 rows for each of the the chevron panel rib, and then at the end there's another 3 stitches that are needed to form the edge. And like I had said here, there's only 1 yarn color needed for this pattern. Okay, so let's go ahead and start knitting the chevron panel. As previously mentioned, there are 6 rows involved in this pattern. Here is what is needed for row 1. You're going to need to do the section between the 2 asterisks repeated until you get to your last 3 stitches in the row, and then you purl those 3 stitches. So between the asterisks, you're supposed to purl 3, make 1 stitch, so that's knit an additional stitch into your existing row to add an additional stitch to the row, then knit 3, purl 2, purl 3 together. And what that does is it takes 3 stitches from your left needle and it purls them all together, so you're essentially turning 3 stitches into 1. So you're decreasing your stitch count from 3 to 1 for that pattern, that knitting section, sorry. But it's okay because we made 1 already before earlier in the row, and then as you continue following along, you'll notice that it's symmetrical basically on both sides of the purl 3 together stitch. So you'll be purling 2 and knitting 3 and making 1 again. And when you make 1, you will be making up for those 3 stitches that are purled together. So you repeat that between those 2 asterisks, and you end with 3 purl stitches. So this is what that looks like when knitted. So here I have my what I've already got knitted for my swatch for the chevron panels. You can see the edging here that's formed by the stockinette stitch. So you basically knit into the right side 3 stitches, or purl into the right side 3 stitches for each of these edges, and that's what forms the edges. And then the chevron panel rib pattern will be formed by following whatever instructions were given in the pattern. So here, let's do the first row. Like I had mentioned, it's right there, and I'm going to first off purl 3 stitches. So that's easy enough. Purling 3, and then you're going to make 1 stitch. And how I like to make stitches, I like to knit into the row that's connecting the stitch on the left needle and the stitch on the right needle, but crossing it so that there won't be any gap that forms from making that extra stitch. So this is what I mean. First of all, because I'm knitting into the row, I will need to have this this yarn on your right hand side to be moved to the back. So here's a good tip. Every time you're switching between purling and knitting in the same row, whenever you're about to knit into a next stitch, make sure that this yarn on your right hand needle is moved to the back behind the right needle. if you're purling into the next stitch, make sure it's moved back to the front and you're purling with this yarn to the front of your right hand needle. So remember, whenever you're switching, if you're about to purl, this yarn has to be at the front of the right needle. But whenever you're about to knit, this yarn has to be moved back to behind the right needle before you knit into the next stitch. That's very important because you don't want extra yarn to be crossing over this right needle and just forming extra stitches that you don't want. So okay, right now, like I said, I went from purling to making one stitch from knitting into the row between these two stitches. So I'm going to move this yarn to the back. And then I'm going to take this right needle and then pick up this yarn that's between the stitch on the left needle and the right needle. And I'm going to slide this yarn that I picked up from the right needle just like this over to the left needle, just like that. But instead of knitting into the back of the stitch, and I can easily make a stitch based on just knitting into the back of the stitch, but then it'll form a big gap that I don't like because you're not crossing this yarn that's between the two needles. So what I like to do is I like to knit into the front of this yarn that's on the left side from left to right. So basically it'll be you can accomplish this by picking up the top part of this yarn on the left needle with your right, kind of just nudging it up a bit, and then taking this right needle and then going in and knitting to the front, remember, to the front of the stitch that you had just slided from the right to the left needle. After picking it up from the bottom, you're picking it up a little, knitting into the top part from left to right, then knit it like you would, so put the yarn over the right stitch like you would just knitting it, and then slide this stitch off to the right needle, and look, there you have. You've made this stitch right here from picking up the row underneath, and it's crossed. Like you see how it's crossed? There's a twist formed in that row underneath, so that helps prevent having a gap form there from making that stitch. So that's what I like to do. So there I have made a stitch, and now I'm supposed to knit 3. That's easy enough. So make sure you count, make sure you're not missing anything, because it's really important that you don't miss any stitches. So you knit 3. Now I'm about to purl. So remember, I'm bringing the stitch to the front because I'm turning it into a purled stitch now. So I'm purling 2. And then now the pattern calls for me to purl 3 together. What this does is I'm basically decreasing the number of stitches on my left needle from 3 to 1 because I'm literally just purling into the next 3 stitches all at once that's on the left needle. So I'm sliding this right needle through all 3 stitches and just purling into it like I would just purl any other stitch. But like you see here, I just turned those 3 stitches that were on the left needle over to the right needle to just 1. But that's okay because I made 1 stitch already early in the row here, and I'm going to be making another stitch. If I continue this pattern, you'll see I'm supposed to purl 2 and then knit 3, and then at the end of this ribbing, oops, it calls for me to make another stitch, make 1. So that's going to even out the 3 stitches that I purled together, so no stitches were added on or taken away from the row. So it will be the same number of stitches by the end of this row. So again, I'm picking up the yarn between the 2 stitches on the left and right needle, putting it from the right to the left needle, and then knitting into the front part of the yarn that's on the left needle from left to right, knitting into it like a normal stitch, and there I've made a stitch. Okay, so now I'm supposed to repeat this exact same list of stitches that I've made from the beginning of the asterisk to form the rest of the rib pattern. So here I go. I'm going to do this faster because you guys already saw it in the last go around, so I don't need you to see exactly what I'm doing. Okay, so made 1, I'm now knitting 3, purling 2, purling 3 together. I can get there, 3 stitches, and then purling 2, then knitting 3, then making 1 again like I had done before, And then once I'm here, I'm at the end of the asterisk pattern, but I have 3 stitches left, so it asks me to purl the last 3 stitches. So I'm bringing this yarn back to the front, and I'm purling the 3 stitches, and there we are. Row 1 complete. See? That's all done. And if you count, they should have the same number of stitches on your needle as when you started before you started knitting row 1. And for me, that's 35 stitches, and it's all there. Alright, so that's row 1. Row 2 has you knitting 3 stitches, and then starting an asterisk pattern again of purling 4, knitting 5, purling 4, knitting 3, repeating from the beginning of the asterisk section all the way to the end. Pretty straightforward, so I don't really have to go into detail with this one. Let me just quickly get through it. 1, 2, 3, knit it 3, purl 4, knit 5, purl 4, oops, knit 3, and if you see knit 3, this is the middle rib there. So the purl 4, knit 5, purl 4 was for the each rib pattern, whereas the knit 3 is for the center part. Okay, and then repeat from the asterisk. So purl 4 again, and then knit 5, and then purl 4. Oops. And then knit 3, and you're done row 2. Pretty straightforward there. Whoops, I made did a little too fast. I didn't catch the whole. Sometimes that happens. You have to make sure that you catch the whole, all of the whole yarn is on the needle. You don't want to miss any there. There we go. And that's the end of row 2. This is the wrong side because row 2 was knitting into the wrong side. So that's what it looks like. Alright, now we're on to row 3. And you can see here it's pretty much the same kind of pattern. Rows 1 and 3 and 5 are pretty much going to be the same. Those are the rows for this pattern that you will be making stitches and decreasing them in the middle of the rib by purling 3 together, then making another one again to balance it out, and then you repeat it again from the asterisk. So that's pretty much the same as row 1. It's just slightly different types of stitches. And then row 4, like you can see here, it's just pretty much like row 2 again. It's just knitting and purling stitches in various patterns. No making stitches involved or decreasing stitches involved for row 4 because that's an even row. And then for row 5, you can see here it's also the same the same thing as rows 1 and 3. Making stitches, purling 3 together at the middle of the rib to decrease the stitches, then making it again up one more up again to balance out the number of stitches in a row, etc. And then lastly, row 6, it's also pretty much the same with rows 2 and 4, where you're just knitting and purling different types of stitches in order to finish off the pattern, and then you repeat these rows number 1 to 6 over and over again, and you will get the Chevron Panels rib pattern, which looks like this. And in my swatch, if you want to see it again, it looks like this on the front side. This is the right side, so here you can see, and this is the back side. And there you have it. That's my knitting instructional video for how to knit the Chevron Panels rib knitting pattern, brought to you by the Knit 2 Together, Purl 2 Together knitting blog. And this has been Karina. Thanks for listening. Bye.